This episode of The Energy Show is proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, my crystal ball is unusually cloudy going into 2025. The perceived demand for solar, storage, and electrification is at an all-time high. But it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future, especially when there's so much economic and political uncertainty. In the words of Oddball in Kelly's Heroes, "Hey, why don't we just knock it off with them negative waves about clean energy? Have a little faith, baby." So, I'm looking positively. With strong business focus of the Trump administration, large-scale clean energy projects are much more likely to thrive than small-scale residential projects. And we'll talk about why in a minute. All right, prediction number one. No one really knows what will happen with IRA tax credits and rebates. So if you're considering solar, batteries, heat pumps, etc. in the future, keep in mind that the current IRA incentives are only assured if your installation is completed by the end of 2025. And the definition of completed kind of varies a little bit. I think technically it says it has to be put into service. So at a minimum, that means you have to have the building inspection, and that may mean that you have to have the utility interconnection. Now, if legislation is passed to change these credits, that new legislation will not take effect until 1/1/2026. In other words, 2026. So play it safe. Complete any electrification projects you're considering well before the end of 2025. That's solar, that's storage, that's putting in heat pumps, that's taking care of any of the IRA rebates or incentives. And consult with your accountant because the IRS does occasionally audit renewable energy tax credit filing paperwork. They may want to make sure that the equipment you're putting in qualifies for the rebate, it was done on time, etc., etc. Okay, prediction number two. TPO system demand will increase if the Residential Inflation Reduction Act incentives are reduced. Now, the TPO stands for third-party owned. So the ITC, which was the solar investment tax credit, is now called the Residential Clean Energy Tax Credits. If these are reduced or eliminated, that's on the residential side, that's going to mean there's going to be increased demand for third-party owned TPO systems. When it's third-party owned, that means another corporate entity owns those systems. And that applies to leases and power purchase agreements or PPAs. Doesn't apply to loans, doesn't apply to cash purchases. And the reason is that the residential tax credits and the business tax credits are in different parts of the tax code. Residential credits are in Section 25 and business credits are in Section 48. So when the industry lobbies for solar and renewable energy credits, they have to lobby twice. One for Section 25, get that tax code change, and one for Section 48. And historically, there's been more lobbying efforts for business credits in Section 48. So the business focus obviously is going to consider under the new Trump administration. So I'd say the business credits in Section 48 are much more likely to not be changed significantly than the residential credits in Section 25. Prediction number three. Utilities throughout the United States will increasingly exercise their monopoly power to suppress or outright prohibit customer-sited solar and battery systems. Now, net energy metering, or NEM, is proven to be the most successful and effective incentive for behind-the-meter solar and battery systems. Behind the meter means it's on the customer side of the meter, and the wires coming down from the street, those are on the utility side. But investor-owned utilities, or IOUs aptly named, realize that NEM rates mean that they lose out on building additional generation and transmission infrastructure. Every battery that homes put in, every big commercial system that's put in with solar panels, that's less energy that the utility is going to have to provide and less energy that they're going to build assets on. So when they lose out on those additional transmission and generation assets, that infrastructure, that reduces their profit growth. So what's happened, and this is starting to happen all over the country, but really California utilities have pioneered this. California utilities have implemented a two-prong effort to eliminate net metering and eliminate a lot of the other incentives and possibilities of just installing solar and batteries in residential, commercial, public systems, even community solar. The two things that they've done really effectively is they lobby the heck out of the state government. They contribute tons of money to politicians in California, including the governor, and they lie about the benefits to the grid of net energy metering. They're saying that net energy metering actually costs ratepayers more, and when you do a more rigorous economic analysis looking at all the benefits, it actually saves people, all ratepayers. It saves money on the grid. But, we in California here, we're dealing with the lies and trying to change that cost shift narrative. Now, what's happening, unfortunately, is other utilities are seeing how successful PG&E and the other utilities in California have been. They're saying, hey, let's use the exact same playbook to eliminate NEM and suppress competition in our state. And so they're just kind of duplicating the same strategy, and it's going to work. When utilities eliminate competition, they maximize their profits. And the other thing that's so frustrating is the Public Utilities Commission in California and other states, they're basically asleep at the switch. They're really doing what the utilities want based on all the lobbying. And what happens is the reliability of the grid goes down and customer electric rates skyrocket. Okay, prediction number 4. Electricity demand will increase more slowly than utilities predict. And the reason is you just follow the money. Utilities get a guaranteed rate of return on all of their assets, including generation systems, power plants, buildings, things like that. And they get an even higher 12% rate of return on transmission assets. That's the long distance transmission lines that you have to put in. So in order to get higher return on assets, in order to get higher profits, no surprise that utilities are highly motivated to increase their assets, to increase their generation plants, and especially to increase their long-distance transmission systems. And the best way to do that is to kind of encourage and even exaggerate future electricity demand so they get to build more assets. And that's happening all over the country. So there's no doubt in my mind that electricity demand will increase with electric vehicles, with heat pumps, and artificial intelligence use in data centers. It's going to go up. But it's very unlikely that these new technologies will be deployed as quickly as expected. And you kind of look at this in retrospect. In the interest of profits, historically, utilities have systematically over-forecasted electricity demand. That means that they leads to excessive generation and transmission infrastructure investments. So by saying the demand is going to be really big, they have to build all these power plants, they have to build all these long-distance transmission lines. Yes, it takes 5 or 10 years to do it. But when those lines are done, there's a lot of excess capacity. In the U.S., our demand has been flat until the last 4 or 5 years. And it's amazing what's happened is rates have continued to go up. All right, so that's something that we just want to be skeptical about, that there's all this talk about AI and data centers using a lot more power. Obviously, we know EVs and electrification will. But in reality, what happens a lot of times is the companies putting in these data centers, they figure out how to do them more efficiently. They figure out how to use other sources of power. All right, prediction number 5. The heat pump rebate process was broken even before it started. This one's kind of unfortunate, but although it was really well-intentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act rebate process for heat pump, HVAC systems, and water heaters, and kind of everything else in the IRA that's got a rebate attached to it, is confusing to both customers and contractors. It doesn't go directly to the Department of Energy. These incentives go indirectly through state energy offices, and I think only like about a dozen state energy offices even have completed the paperwork so that they can start to take that money. And unfortunately, what might happen is the other 38 states are just not going to get these rebates. So what ends up happening is, even in the states that are kind of getting through this process, to handle all the additional paperwork that comes from state energy departments like the California Energy Commission, to handle all this paperwork and the delays that happen and the uncertainties, Contractors have to raise their price. It's a lot more complicated. Instead of just saying, hey, we're going to put in this heat pump, we're going to do it next week, we'll get a building permit. You have to kind of get an application in. It has to be approved. It has to be certain equipment. The equipment has to be available. Sometimes this equipment disappears or doesn't become available, and then you kind of got to start again. So what contractors do is they basically just say, you know what? I can sell a nice, $25,000 heat pump system, but you know what? I can just put in a furnace for $10,000 and get that quick money. So what's happening is the contractors aren't really trying to leverage these incentives. They're just too complicated. So instead of putting in that heat pump, they replace the methane furnace so that customer is going to be using methane or natural gas for another 10 or 15 years, or they replace that gas hot water with another gas hot water heater. Yeah, we learned this from the solar industry. Simply switching to a straight 30% tax credit incentives for heat pumps, as with solar installer, would be a much faster way to accelerate heat pump installations. Okay, while we're on the topic, prediction number 6. Heat pumps combined with solar will really shine in 2025. Now, here's the thing. When customers install a heat pump, they eliminate their methane or their natural gas bills from space heating and water heating. But now they're using more electricity, and their electric bill goes up. So when the heat pumps are powered by rooftop solar and storage, customers' net utility bills go down. Yes, they need more electricity, but the electricity is really, really cheap when compared to what the utilities want to charge. And in some places, and even in California, it used to be, you can get to zero or a negative electric bill if you put in the right combination of solar and storage. So as a result, what's going to happen is the fastest growing markets for heat pump retrofits are going to be in places where rooftop solar and storage are already popular upgrades. And when you look at the benefits of heat pumps, because it kind of combines an air conditioner, you're going to find that many of the more temperate climates in the southern part of the United States are much more popular. They also get a lot more sun. So you're able to generate more electricity, and you don't need quite as much heating. We obviously need air conditioning, and all these locations already have air conditioning. Heat pumps do that with a combined piece of equipment. All right, prediction number 7. New UL 3741 solar rapid shutdown codes add price pressure to micro-inverter and optimizer component suppliers. Now, these optimizers and microinverters are called module-level power electronics. You put a little package of electronics on the back of every panel. It's the size of a paperback or a hardcover book. And they provide some good benefits. Better safety, because you can manage each panel individually. Better efficiency, which leads to better energy harvest. You save more money over the life of the system. And monitoring, panel-by-panel monitoring. But the added electronics increases the failure rates, and that increases future maintenance costs. We never had these issues with the older systems. The inverter broke, and you can fix that, but it was really straightforward. The panels almost never broke, and the ones now are even better. So in addition to the extra failure rates and maintenance costs, you have more installation and configuration costs because you've got to install electronics on every panel, you got to wire it in, and you have to identify which bit of electronics, which MLPE device goes with which panel. So this new standard called UL 3741 uses these things called mid-circuit interrupters, or MCIs. It's kind of like the size of a fat magic marker instead of an MLPE device. And as long as it's done properly with the right kind of racking, it's another way to achieve code compliance for rapid shutdown. And it kind of caught the industry by surprise. The standard came out in early 2024. It freaked out the MLPE companies, and some of the old string inverter companies are saying, hey, we kind of got a new license on life. And what we're finding is that the inverters that are using these MCIs, it ends up being a cheaper system. So it reduces our upfront equipment costs because we don't have to buy more expensive MLPE devices for every single panel. We can buy a cheaper MCI for every maybe 2 or 3 panels, or maybe 2 for every single array. And that reduces installation costs and reduces upfront costs. So you can get, in many ways, a faster payback. Over the 20-year lifetime of the system, it actually may not make as much sense, but a lot of times people are looking for that upfront cost, and you can save thousands of dollars with these things. Okay. Prediction number 8, battery system shortages will continue in 2025. And these started at the end of 2024. But the newcomers to the battery system industry are going to be hard-pressed to meet this demand. And here's the thing. There's an abundance. There's lots of companies that make lithium-ion battery cells and lithium-ion battery modules. I get sometimes an email every single day from some new company saying, hey, we got really great batteries. They're made in China. Why don't you buy them? I'm like, eek. Because it's not just the battery, it's the complete system. And when we kind of look at the well-supported, code-compliant battery storage systems or energy storage systems, there's not that many of them that are really ready for prime time and really hitting the right price point that are reliable. And the reason is it takes several years to develop these integrated battery storage systems. You have to get the hardware all working together, and that's combining the battery with the battery management system, with the gateway, with the transfer switch, and with the communications. And, once you have the hardware working, you've got to have a complete suite of software, get through the certification process, and then once you're kind of ready to sell, then you can kind of build up that sales and support infrastructure. You need a sales team. You need to get into distribution. You'll need a customer service department. You'll need training. That's a lot of work. So when we're kind of looking at the situation now in 2025, where there's a shortage of certain battery systems, it's the relatively mature incumbent, the ones that are already in the market, battery system suppliers. They have a big advantage because they already have the key components. They already have distribution and a sales and support infrastructure, and they've got most of the software suite or all the software suite working. They're through all the key certification things. So these incumbent battery suppliers, the mature ones, they're really better equipped to ramp up production and accelerate sales for distribution. It's nothing more than an email to the manufacturing facility to say, hey, let's make another 10,000 of these things, because they can push those through the existing channels. And I'll just tell you one hint here. When it comes to battery systems, reliability is much more important than energy capacity, power output, and cost. The most important thing for installers is finding a battery system that's reliable, because these things, there's a lot of moving parts. And when there's a customer service issue, we got to make sure we can fix it. And if the manufacturer doesn't really have a reliable system, although it might be cheap up front, it might have great specs on paper, but if it doesn't work, we've got unhappy customers. Okay, prediction number 9. Battery systems with integrated inverters will become the standard. Now, rooftop solar and batteries have become so interrelated, the demand for inverter-only and battery-only components will decline. There's companies that just sold the battery or the battery system. There's companies that just sold the inverter. There's companies that took parts of those systems and combined it with a gateway and a transfer switch. It's very complicated. And the reality is that contractors, they want to install one box on the wall and connect it in. And they want that one box to work with one set of integrated software. They don't want 2 or 3 boxes mounted on the wall, whether they're from the same manufacturer or not. They don't want 2 or 3 boxes, more work to install, more work to wire. And these different boxes often require different software platforms. So, the battery comes from one company, the inverter comes from another. They both have monitoring software. It's twice as much work. So when we kind of look at the future, we're looking at the upfront equipment cost, the labor cost, and future support costs. These costs are all lower with fully integrated systems from one supplier. So that's our preference. And there's a few companies that are kind of taking that approach, and it really works much, much better for us. And its price is lower. It's more reliable. Our customers happy. We're happy. Okay. Prediction number 10. Grid defection will enter the energy system lexicon. Now, as predicted by the Rocky Mountain Institute, this is Amory Lovin's business, way back in 2014, there's 2 possible trajectories, 2 possible ways for the electricity grid to evolve. The first trajectory is what they call the integrated grid. And with the integrated grid, there's an aggressive build out of inexpensive behind-the-meter distributed rooftop solar and storage. Homes, businesses, community solar, public buildings, everywhere. There's solar and batteries everywhere, plus utility scale solar. It's all integrated. And in order to kind of encourage the build out of this, there's net energy metering payments or some other method based on the benefits to the distribution grid. There's 2 grids. There's the distribution grid, all the local wires, and there's the long distance transmission grid. Those are the more expensive wires that are usually owned by the utility. So everything's integrated, and this is really important. There's fair compensation to what we call the customer energy resources. So if the utility wants to use our battery, we call that a customer energy resource. They fairly compensate the customer for that. They don't try and say, you've got to give us your battery or else. That's what some utilities are saying. You got to give us that or else. Or they take away net metering and they say, all the excess power you have, we're going to keep and we're not going to give you a penny for it. Now, utilities call these customer energy resources distributed energy resources. Yes, they're distributed, but I call them customer energy resources because they're installed, paid for, and owned by the customer. These are customer assets. You can't just steal them. You can't just use them without compensation or with de minimis compensation. And part of this integrated grid, in addition to fair compensation to these customer energy resources, there's regulations of utilities that are based on performance. So if they provide safe, reliable, inexpensive power, they get more money. They get better benefits. And if they don't, they lose out. So it's really performance-based. That's the way the world goes around. All right. Second trajectory, pointed out by the Rocky Mountain Institute, is grid defection. So the first is integrated grid. That's kind of ideal. It's going to be cheaper for everybody. Maybe not as profitable for the utilities, but cheaper. But then there's the grid defection path. And in that grid defection path, utilities eliminate net energy metering. They create high fixed charges for people to connect from the grid. So they may charge you. Right now, the fixed charge in California is $24. They want to charge $100. Just for the privilege of having an electric meter, you pay $100 a month, $1,200 a year. That's a lot. They have a huge transmission infrastructure. So if you are putting utility solar farms everywhere, 100, 500, 1,000 miles away, you got to run wires to that. Although the solar power plant, these solar farms that are wherever you put them, they're really cheap. 1 cent a kilowatt hour life cycle cost, maybe 1.5 with batteries. It's really, really cheap now. But you need exorbitantly expensive transmission lines. It takes 10 years or more with permitting, construction, everything else going through to put these transmission lines in. But that's kind of the path we're going down here in California. The utilities, we're going to use their solar farms 500 miles away, wind farms 1,000 miles away, but they're going to build these great transmission lines. They're going to take 10 years, but they make huge profits on it. And then what's going to happen when you kind of look forward of 5 years, 10 years at the rate the solar and battery costs are coming down, we're not going to need all those assets. I mean, if nuclear turns out to be great, or if batteries get really, really cheap and we have solar on every single building, you're going to have excess transmission lines. You're going to have excess distribution systems. So we call those stranded assets. And then there's also something called regulatory capture. So regulatory capture is basically when the regulators, like the Public Utilities Commission, are captured, so influenced by the utilities that they do what the utilities want. And here's what's happening. Due to the utility lobbying, combined with what I consider incompetent utility regulation here in California, and we're clearly in a situation where the utility regulators, the CPUC, they're captured by the utilities. They do what PG&E wants. So unfortunately, we're in a situation where policies are in place in California and spreading around the country that lead us down the grid defection path. That means that people are going to be paying higher and higher electric rates. There's going to be more fossil fuel generation because there's no time. Data centers, we want to build this data center, or people are buying EVs. We don't have 10 more years to put in transmission lines. Let's just repurpose that old nuclear plant, or let's just put in a new natural gas plant. More fossil fuel generation. Customer service is terrible, and record utility profits. Now, the reason why we call that the grid defection path is people start saying, hey, I got to pay $1,200 a year, $100 a month just to connect to the grid, plus exorbitant electric rates. I got a huge battery in my car. I'm just going to use that battery at night. I'm going to charge it up during the day at work. I got solar panels on my roof. I'm going to defect from the grid. And that's starting to happen slowly, but it's going to happen more and more as solar and batteries become more capable, more cost effective, and as these electricity costs and fixed costs get higher and higher because people start saying, hey, I can put in, a bigger investment. I make sure my truck plugs into the house or my car plugs into the house. I'll use that at night. And you've got a rolling battery with 100 kilowatt hours of capacity. That's kind of all you need to get through 2 or 3 nights of cold, cloudy weather. So we're going down the path of grid defection. You're going to hear about that a lot more because it's going to start to make sense. It's going to start really slowly, but as the battery and storage and EVs get cheaper and cheaper, it's going to take off. All right. So these are my 2025 solar, storage, and electrification predictions. Kind of just highlights, best advice. If you're interested in solar, storage, heat pumps, energy efficiency, kind of anything covered by the IRA, act now. Right now, so you get lined up so you can definitely get your 2025 tax credits. There's going to be a rush in the fourth quarter, we've seen this all the time, to get systems installed by the end of the year. And the good contractors are going to be really, really busy mid to the end of 2025. And there may be more equipment shortages, particularly batteries. All right, that's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you missed any of today's show, you can go to the Energy Show website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
This episode of The Energy Show was proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.